I want to attempt to have a more measured discourse about these top QB prospects in 2024. You'll hear all of the above for a guy like Caleb, best prospect of all time, next Mahomes, and the next dude will say he's zesty, I don't like him, LGBTQB. It's always absolutes when talking about these guys. They're either garbage or the GOAT, based off one game they happen to see. You can hear any or all of these adjectives. So my goal is to take you through some advanced analytics from Pro Football Focus and create a metric that isolates the role of the QB and encapsulates the full scope of attributes we want to see in these guys, and hopefully we'll come out of it with a nuanced view. First, we need to understand the most traditional holistic measure of quarterback performance. It takes all these volume stats that are basic, but definitely are correlated with proficient play. They're outdated in the sense that it doesn't do a great job of isolating the effect of the quarterback in a given game. Completions can be skewed by how far down the field a quarterback is asked to throw, and touchdowns can be misleading if a quarterback tends to drive his team down the field and they punch the ball in with their running back. What about the other 10 plays on the drive, right? And interceptions can be dropped. Here were the leaders in quarterback rating in 2017. The main thing that jumps out is Alex Smith above Tom Brady's MVP season. While he's a solid player and the king of game managers, there are things that we can use that are better indicators of play, like turnover-worthy plays instead of interceptions. This uses throws that have a high probability of being intercepted rather than actual interceptions. When taking this into account, the order seems to be restored. And that's why we want to substitute in stats like turnover-worthy play percentage to get a better grasp on how the decisions and throws are contributing to success on a play-by-play basis. Here are some of the indicators I chose to include in my metric, which will be explained along the way. The positives you want to maximize as a quarterback, where the negatives you want to minimize. The first one we'll examine is offensive grade, where each play is graded from a -2 to 2 scale, 2 being the best play possible, -2 being a really horrible interception, probably that Marcus Mariota one. And I got familiar with these grades working for PFF, really doing all their grunt work during college, logging plays so they can summarize it with these glorious results. So don't be cynical about it unless you're cynical about me. To build my metric, I combined selections of these more granular statistics, putting more weight on some than others and visualizing these relationships between variables. Small aside on my methodology, I hope I can explain this given that I was in a billion stats classes in college, but for example, if I'm including both of these metrics in my calculation, one has a much bigger range than the other, so any small change in turnover-worthy play percentage from one player to another is going to be still overshadowed by the fact that most of the calculation contains this big offensive grade number. And we want these two measures to be on the same scale so they're comparable, so we do that using how many standard deviations away from their mean they are. So how am I pooling these metrics together into certain categories? First, we have accuracy, which is important. We want someone who can throw downfield into tight windows under pressure. And processing. Honestly, any of these branches could have been the GOAT branch, but have to delineate it somehow. But time to throw and turnover-worthy plays. And playmaking. I wish I could have kept going with the alliteration, but I wasn't going to make it the Blake Bortles branch, so had to be Mahomes. One thing that I debated was that time to throw is not necessarily negative and scramble rate is not necessarily positive, but I'm hoping that, they'll balance each other out. And here's the beginning of the rankings. The first ingredient was Z offensive grade, and this is who is most efficient on a very fine-grained play-by-play basis. So Jaden Daniels starts at the top of my metric because he's leading in Z offensive grade. We'll see who's the top when we add in accuracy. But here's the thing, right? Not all these stats are created equally in my mind. And here's where my bias comes in, but I put 50% more weight on these deep throw grades, completion, depth of target, and pressure percentage than I did on the regular offensive grade. With these added ingredients into our pot, let's see how our rankings shuffle up. So we have 2 fallers, Penix and McCarthy, and 2 risers, May, and Williams, no doubt because of these deep throw stats. Drake has the benefit of including adjusted completion percentage, which counts drops as completions. This helps us identify how accurate the quarterback is rather than how often the receiver catches their passes. Some other real hard-hitting analytics, I've identified Bo Nix as the most punchable face, most likely to be in something called Sigma Chi, and I've also identified JJ as the most likely to have Beyblades. Anyways, interestingly, McCarthy was in the optimal quadrant of accuracy and depth of target in general, but when we filter for deep 20-plus throws only, he just wasn't given enough responsibility in the offense to make plays down the field, even with his overall intermediate accuracy. He's contradictory to our biggest risers when incorporating these deep throw stats. Drake May, who was tasked with throwing receivers open in tight windows downfield consistently, and he delivered at a high rate. The tosses of the majestic Lisan Al-Gaib of the Patriots, I would just show these all day if I could. You can see Caleb and Drake's proficiency in this area being responsible for their ascension, as well as Penix's enormous volume of deep throws. But Penix fell to last place. Penix's volume was outweighed by his lesser accuracy on deep throws, but I do think he throws the sweetest spiral. The two guys that remain at the top of our rankings after including the accuracy component, Daniels and Nix, are sustained by sizable leads in categories like deep accuracy for Daniels, hitting his prolific receivers in stride, and adjusted completion percentage or accuracy percentage for Nix, albeit low depth of target. I see him as a high floor, low ceiling player who makes quick decisions to get playmakers the ball, but is reliant on their yards after the catch. The Purdy of the draft, maybe. Daniels and Nix are also supported by being tops in the overall grade, which I showed you first. The next branch to add into the mix is processing, and Bo Nix is going to own this one, staying in second place in my overall rankings, while Penix, who tends to throw the ball away when pressured, living to see another day, also rising, while Caleb falls. In fact, Jordan Travis of FSU jumped into the top 5 in the overall rankings in light of the new elements. Nix is by far the best at mitigating risk, which counts for a lot since I gave turnover-worthy play percentage the biggest weight so far. Caleb is on the polar opposite side of the optimal area here, having an inclination to hold the ball and go for the spectacular play, leading to volatile decision-making this year. Adding in the final branch into our metric calculation, playmaking. We're looking for players that can show escapability and ingenuity under dire conditions, using scramble rate, pressure to sack rate, which is how often the quarterback gets sacked when pressured, and big time throw percentage. Essentially the opposite of turnover-worthy throws, 20 plus yards down the field in tight windows with high degree of difficulty. Throws that essentially swing win probability, hence tied for my biggest weight. Drake May slots into second place due to his big-time throw percentage, being double Bo Nix's, and Caleb falls due to an astronomical pressure-to-sack rate. Along these axes, you can see how difficult it is to scramble while having a low pressure-to-sack rate. It's essentially an equal trade-off between either having scrambling ability or having a low risk of sacks, even though one might be way more fun to watch than the other. One end of the spectrum is the safer options, Penix and Nix, who don't scramble but also get rid of the ball when pressured, preventing sacks. And then you have Drake and Jaden on the opposing side. But getting to the most important graph I can show, based on my weights, the driving force of my metrics rankings is encapsulated by these two factors given the highest weights, and specifically their relation to each other for a given player. Breaking this matrix down into quadrants is useful. Ultimately, Jaden, Drake, and Penix playmake while mitigating risk, putting them in the ideal quadrant. Bo Nix plays it safe, and Caleb is the most volatile. This is by no means an absolutely comprehensive ranking system, since we can't account for things like these. If 2022 stats are included, then Caleb and Drake are probably bumped up. Jaden Daniels probably looks a bit different if he's throwing to receivers that aren't blazing past the DBs. And Nix is probably forced to make more unconventional plays if he's put under more pressure. With that said, you can consider these rankings as an assessment of the risk associated in picking a certain prospect based on the most recent year.